my button? That one. Wow. First up, and you're not wrong, I really can't see anyone behind the kind of halfway mark. So hello back there. I believe there are a few of you. Wow. When Mick asked me to talk, I guess I was obviously very thrilled and very privileged, but also intimidated because I know everyone in this room probably actually knows more about the SDGs than I do, even though I live and breathe and work in this space, because there is so much to know, and I can only really speak to climate action. That's the one that I do every day. It's the one I'm passionate about, not because I don't care about the others, but because there's 17 of them. So today I'm going to focus on climate action, why I work in that space, what we do in this space, and what you might take away as a cohort of people that work in businesses, are the future of the workforce to try and help us all reach net zero. So the broad theme is net zero, what, why, how. Pretty simple. A lot of it is 101 based. So if I see you nodding off, I'm going to know I need to up my game for next time. But let's start with a bit of context. This is myself and my co-founder, Joanna, 4 years ago. So I think I look a bit younger there. Starting a business certainly ages you a little bit. So does having a toddler, as I'm sure a lot of you can attest to. But I always think about, why did I end up in sustainability? Why did I end up in climate? And I'm not one of those people that has one of these stories of, being in a burning forest or thinking something mad about how disastrous the future was. I had a very safe and privileged upbringing in the UK where the weather was always awful. So I wasn't really aware of this thing called climate change. But actually, weirdly, I look back at my career since university, and I actually studied psychology at Oxford University. So I've always been really obsessed with behavior change and how we can help change people's behaviors. And that actually ended up leading me to a startup, which wasn't called a sustainability startup back then, but it was a car sharing company, a bit like Go Get Here. It was the UK equivalent. They never talked about sustainability. They just said, share a car, it will save you money. And I look back and think, maybe actually some of my values were instilled there, because I really, truly believed we did not all need a car. I learned a lot about running a small business then. I loved it so much that I guess that really stuck with me. However, I then went into finance and management consulting for 10 years, where I learned a lot, but it's fair to say I wasn't passionate about what I did every day. I had an enormous carbon footprint. I would travel the world, often in business class, and I cringe thinking about it now, but I learned a lot. And where it ultimately led me to was Macquarie. Again, you're probably thinking, where is this going? How is this a story about how you got into sustainability? But Macquarie, the bank, as many of you will be aware, is actually the owner of the biggest portfolio of renewable energy assets in the world. And I was lucky to work on a lot of projects there. And I just got obsessed. I was like, this is cool. This connects sustainability, the future, with finance, with profit, with an actual job that might pay my bills in the future. And I just got more and more into it, and eventually thought, I've got to go back to my roots. I've got to go back to startup because I love building things. So in 2020, Joanna and I finally decided to quit our jobs. And we thought, what is a problem that we have felt together? And back in 2017, we launched a handbag brand together again. Not particularly sustainable. But we thought, well, let's make a handbag for life. Let's build a product that women will use every day and never have to change. Something that will literally last 80 years. Timeless, well-made, and that's where leather actually plays a very good role. It's very durable. But we just didn't know how to make it sustainable. We didn't know all of the metrics for sustainability. We didn't know what the supply chain decisions were. And we thought, well, if we're having this problem and we genuinely care about this, there must be hundreds, thousands, millions of small business owners that are all thinking, I would love my business to be more sustainable, but I just don't know how. I don't have the resource, the education, the money, the time to work it out. And that was really why Trace was born. So our mission today, and it has been from day one, is to enable every single business to reach net zero. And I will come on to how we do that in a minute. So what are we going to cover today? And I'll keep it really quick. What does net zero actually mean? Which I'm sure 90% of you could define perfectly, but let's just be absolutely certain here, because I do hear a lot of people using the term wrong. Why should you care? Again, probably should be quite an easy sell in this room. And how could we get there? What could you guys walk away with and actually do tomorrow? So what does it actually mean? Well, we all know about the Paris Agreement. We all know that we've got to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. And the way to do that is to limit global GHG emissions to net zero. Now, the original goal was 2050. That's kind of been revised to 2030. We have 6 years to try and reduce our carbon emissions to net zero. But what do we mean by net and zero? If it was zero, we might all kind of be aligned on what that means. But this net bit really confuses people. Thank you. I should have prepped a little dance there. That was good. Bring more on. Net zero. Okay. Well, it's well defined. That's the good news. It basically means a 90% reduction from baseline. And if we're talking about baseline today, yesterday, tomorrow, Ghana doesn't matter. We have a lot of emissions and we've got to reduce them. We know there's going to be residual emissions. It's just very hard to avoid some level of carbon dioxide or other nitrous oxide and GHGs being emitted. So we've got to try and get that down to 90%, and the rest can be removed. So we know there is always going to be a place for removals, i.e. either nature-based or through things like direct air capture. It's a whole other story. I won't go into that. So we kind of know where we are today and we know where we need to get to. The problem is no one really knows what happens in between those two numbers. The journey is not well defined, and that's the problem that I'm trying to solve at Trace. Just imagine this. Imagine trying to go on a diet and lose weight, but you don't know how many calories there are in your food. Imagine trying to set a household budget, but you don't know how much you're spending on everything because you don't have a nice digital app. Imagine going on a run and forgetting to put on your Strava. Basically didn't happen, right? So frustrating. What you can measure, you can manage, right? And it's exactly the same for carbon emissions, which is why the start of the journey to net zero is all about measurement. And a few people have brought that up today. It's something I'm really passionate about because if we know where the problems are today, we know how to prioritize our time. So what we look at Trace is the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions of a business. And we use carbon dioxide because it's one metric. If we try and confuse it with all the other different GHG emissions, you just blow the minds of people that don't do this day in, day out. So we always use a carbon dioxide equivalent, but we're very passionate about making sure it's all of the value chain emissions because you have influence over all of that. I'm sure many of you in here have made procurement decisions, travel decisions, commuting decisions at work, which all contribute to your business's carbon footprint. So that's the scope of what we're looking at here at Trace. So why should you care, apart from the obvious trying to prevent what's happening on the left here? We know that we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I think a lot of those clips at the beginning showed that we have to act today. It's already too late. You've heard every phrase like that. We know it's too late. But I think I hear a lot that kind of businesses have too much on their plates. Of course they do. They have not enough resource, not enough budget. They're not big enough. They're not going to make an impact. This is Shell's job. This is, Woodside's job to figure out. But the simple fact of the matter is that every single person in this room has a footprint and all of our businesses have a footprint. So if we want to try and prevent the left-hand side, we have to give a shit, frankly. And it's your job in this room to try and influence change. Now, the good news is that it doesn't just have to come down to please prevent climate change, because I know that one doesn't work always in the boardroom. There is a lot of legislation coming in. And it's really worth being aware of that because it will help you build your case internally. And I'll go through a few of those incoming legislations soon. I won't bore you to death. But we've also got corporate net zero targets. So a lot of these big companies setting targets, that's going to probably affect you as a small business. Consumers care, employees care. And frankly, if we do nothing, then your business might not exist in a few years. So there is a lot of evidence to show that in 5 years' time, might be 4, might be 6, I haven't placed a bet yet, but I believe that in about 5 years' time, every single company will have a carbon reduction plan, some form of report that says this is where our emissions are and this is where we want to get to. I believe it will be that common. So my job is to try and educate and inspire as many people to get on that journey today. Good news is the government is playing ball. As of last year, it has announced that mandatory climate disclosures will be introduced from next year. Now, this only really affects the massive companies initially. So unless you're working at Telstra, Coles, any of the big emitting companies, you're not going to be affected by this tomorrow. As you can see on the left-hand side, over 500 employees, $1 billion in assets, and 500 million in revenues. Pretty big companies, so it's probably not a huge number of people in this room. But actually, by 2027, up to 20,000 businesses will be required by law to measure and report publicly their carbon emissions. So that might feel like quite a long time away, but if your company's never even thought about emissions, there's a lot of learning to do, a lot of upskilling, and a lot of new technology that's required to help you get there. And this is, while I don't love it to be about a stick, it really is a stick. So it's really exciting for me because it is accelerating the adoption of carbon accounting. Oh gosh. I didn't know that was going to be like that. Anyway, you can see a very quick uptick in the number of companies that will need to report. And this is no longer just a big business requirement. As Joe Longo from ASIC said, this is the biggest change to corporate reporting in a generation. It is huge. CFOs, frankly, are shitting themselves, excuse the bad language. But what's really interesting about this is that it does affect SMEs too. So if you work for a small company, really anyone that wasn't in one of those three groups that I just showed on screen, it is going to affect you. And that is because of Scope 3, which I mentioned earlier. So Scope 3 is all about your value chain emissions. If you as a business have set yourself a net zero target or have to report your Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, your suppliers are literally contributing towards your footprint. And what that is meaning in practice is a lot of these big companies are actually pushing the responsibility for carbon reporting and decarbonization down onto their suppliers. So this is going to soon affect almost anyone. Here's a few real live examples, both from the UK, the NHS, where we operate, from Coles, AstraZeneca, Atlassian. Some of these massive companies have publicly said, if you want to do business with us in the future, you're going to have to tell us your emissions and you're going to have to show us that you're bringing them down year on year. Because if you don't, as a supplier, these companies are never going to get to net zero, right? So it is a really big change that's coming, whether it takes, as I said, kind of 5 years, 3 or 6. It's something that I really hope all of you kind of can see will affect you directly. So where do you get started? What next? What can you do I don't know whether you're CEOs, board members, or just started in a job yesterday. The good news is you can make an impact. You can do something at your work, and I'll talk you through what some of those things are. If you feel like you don't know where to start, the good news is you are not alone. Just one report showed that about 2/3 of businesses have no idea where to start. And that presents an opportunity for me. That's why I was thrilled to accept this opportunity to speak, because we've just got to get the word out there. We've got to help people understand that this is coming and that they have a role to play, and to try and give them the tools to get started. Now, the cool thing is, and we've based this on thousands of footprints that I have measured through our software, that about 65% of emissions are directly influenced or even controlled by employees, by you guys. Often it's 100%. And that comes down to, I just realized it's badly formatted, but what you can see here is that employees, which is how you commute and the energy you use when you're working from home, that's your decision. That's completely within your control. And then the supply chain, so any services and goods that you're buying, again, probably within your control if you have any form of budget at work. Those two things contribute over 2/3 of a company's footprint. So it doesn't matter what your role is, you probably have a role to play in helping your company decarbonize. So as I said at the start, and if you think about the Strava thing, put your Strava on now. We want your business to start recording its emissions so that you can start making meaningful progress. Trace is a software solution designed for SMEs, and we have anywhere from a company of 2 people to 2,000 people. It's nice and easy to use. It integrates with your accounting platform. It pulls in your bills. It does surveys with your staff. It's pretty simple in the grand scheme. And it's all about helping you and your business understand where its emissions are and where the biggest opportunities for reduction are, so that you can get started today. Now, I'm just going to end on the big elephant in the room, greenwashing. And It's something that kind of frustrates me that this is such a big focus, because unfortunately it is distracting, I think, momentum. It's stopping some companies act because they're worried about being accused of greenwashing. And the companies that have been accused have been rightly accused, but they've done so with intent. All I can say about greenwashing is be transparent. It's not about being perfect. It's about being honest. It's about being open. We build loads of cool reports on behalf of our clients that are all about, here are our emissions. We know we can't do anything about this. We know we haven't made any progress here, but we have made progress here. It's all about authenticity and transparency. And if you can combine those two things in how you talk about your sustainability initiatives, how can you possibly be accused of greenwashing? So for the people that I can see, raise your hand if any of these 4 statements apply to the company you work for, if you do work for a company. You have enterprise or government clients. Anyone? Your employees value sustainability. It's quite a few of you. You have consumer-facing products. Yep, amazing. Or you have more than 100 staff or 50 million turnover. Yeah, a few. I'd say that's 90% of you. Those companies need to start measuring today, because this legislation is coming. We're here to help, and I'd love to hear from you. We are powering the journey to net zero. We would love you to join us. Thank you so much.